to bring in a priestess. We called it the Veiled Priestess, which was an idea that we had to balance the two priests. They're always here for the rest of the episodes. And we have a wonderful priestess that brought us some points that are interesting to discuss or revisit maybe from the previous episodes.
Well, you were saying about open circles, and that some covens have open circles for initiates or seekers before they go through the doors. And something that I actually wanted to ask about was soirees. How do you feel about the soirees? Because that's something that we do in our coven sometimes, not as frequently lately now that we've got a couple of standing working members, but we had a lot of people attending there, and I found it was quite a good way to sort of have like a pre-interview, if that makes sense, to kind of suss out, are they serious about this? Are they just looking for another notch on their belt if they've been initiated into quite a few other things? Those sorts of things.
Did you go to any soirees, Marco?
I did not. I did not go to any soirees. So I found my initiating coven through, what was that old website, Witchfox, which is now defunct. But I know, right, that's an Alexandrian tradition to hold these soirees.
I don't think it was like as formal as we made it now. I think they just hold meetings, public meetings, or people could come in and they could just have that. And this was held by Alex and Maxine in the 70s. And of course, the famous pub meetings. And the coven would just meet in the pub before and after the rituals. And there was a day in the week that Alex would have a session of question and answers, and people would come in. It is said that the door would be open and there would be people in the stairs, listening to him, and the room would be full. So I think that's the idea. And Maxine did with the Temple of the Mother. I think it's a wonderful way of people coming in and you know them or meet them. But most of all, I think it is about them asking questions to you and make sense a little bit if that's for them, or you also to look at them. Isn't that your experience when you do it?
Well, pretty much where I started, funny enough, I also found the coven that I'm currently with on Witchfox before it closed down. And then we attended a few soirees together, and it was just really a place to learn, for lack of a better word, what the flavor of Alexandrian witchcraft was. Because at the time I was very interested in the craft, but I didn't have the knowledge of which books to read. And, once you've gone over the 5,000, 10,000, 2 million books of spells, you're just kind of like, I'm looking for something with a bit more meat, but I don't know what. And that was where I got told, okay, well, read What Witches Do, read Firechild, read these books, because this will give you a good idea of what our witchcraft is sort of geared towards. And that I found really, really helped. And I attended quite a few, actually, before I made the decision to request for initiation. Mm-hmm. So it really was a very friendly atmosphere, very laid back. There was wine, there was cheese. Everybody had a chance to ask their questions and have the priest answer them. And yeah, it was actually a very lovely experience without giving away too much, if that makes sense. I think it can really, if done well, set people on the right path to be able to learn what they need before they know if this is right for them.
How is it now being on the other side? So you were going into, so now you're hosting it as well. So how is that for you?
Very interesting. There's a lot of colorful characters that come through sometimes where we kind of go, yeah, no. But we actually had a few initiates come from those soirees as well. And it's just, I think it's a very lovely place for the priesthood that are looking, if they request for initiation, it's a good way to be able to see them not in an interview sense, because let's say people are always on their best behavior and get the right answers when you interview them for things. It's always, yes, I'm dedicated, I have vocation. But when they get into sort of that conversation mode, you can start more kind of sussing out what is actually going on there. And also it really helps setting people straight on some questions that they have, like, is it all sex orgies? Is it this? Is it that? And you're like, no, not exactly. And setting some people on other paths, if that makes sense. If it's not quite right for them, we can at least suggest, okay, well, if you're looking for something along this line, maybe take a look at this. Or maybe have a look at this practitioner if you want something else. So yeah, other than that, absolutely hair-raising being on that side for the first time. It's a very big shift going from listening to actually having to be able to answer the questions. You know them, but it's always a little bit harrowing the first time.
Yeah, it is. It is. And you never know what they're going to ask. It's always a surprise.
It is always a surprise, but that's the same as some of the initiation requests that we got. It was you were the one saying you got an email or something going, initiation, please, or something along those lines. We've had some scary ones as well, but you go, is that how you write an email to someone you don't know?
Yeah.
That's terrifying. How do you do that?
It is. And this is why, Michael, you said, I am expecting an email beginning with dear so-and-so.
Exactly. There needs to be some formality. And if this is your first impression, it has to be a good one. And then I have a question, like, how do you get the word out for a soiree?
We have a Coven Facebook page that we post some things on for people that are looking for possible covens or initiation into their Alexandrian tradition. And we would usually post up on there, we are having a soiree on such and such a night at such and such a time. Bring wine, bring good cheer, reach out to us if you're interested. And then people that we're interested would reach out, and they'd obviously be given further details because nobody in this day and age is putting their address online for strangers to rock out.
No.
Yes, and this is, you have to remember this was done in Maxine's apartment in London. So it was open door.
It does speak on your point, Kerrigan, about like proselytizing. It's sort of a tightrope to walk in terms of how much do you, quote unquote, advertise and how can someone find you?
I think that it's a very nice way of doing it. This goes into other occasions, for instance, that you have all over the pagan world and the esoteric world, where you have pub moots and you have gatherings and you have all of those things. They have different names, but really they're pretty much the same. But a soiree, I think it's a little different because it is really for you to go to meet initiates and to meet people that they're connected with the path that you are interested in, or just generally, because sometimes, not all of the people that come to soirees will ask for initiation. On the contrary, but probably 95% of them not. But I think that it's a wonderful way to give them the opportunity to ask you questions. We did this in Boston for a while. We tried several things. We went to a public place and we hosted in our own living room. I think the living room, it's a little bit more intimate. It's very interesting to receive people that have no clue, but you will ask people a couple of questions before they come in, at the door, but, when they contact you. And they can even respond to some questions about why are they coming, things like that. But in the 70s was pretty much relaxed. Let's get together and go to Alex and Maxine's. And many people that went there stayed there in their company at the time. But it is very interesting because I think that this is needed. I think that the human contact is needed. People need to be face to face. We're in the era where there's a lot of internet, there's a lot of virtual things, and the craft needs a little bit more of contact with people one-on-one in this regard.
It's nice to know that it's still a practice that's upheld.
Yes.
In general, because obviously it's not something that we do often. It's not every Friday, but when we feel that there's a need for it, when we've been having a lot of questions that are posted or, emailed through to us, we'll say, oh, well, let's have a soiree. They can all come through and they can have that contact because, as you say, that contact is super important.
Yeah.
There's no point just answering an email and saying, oh, well, this, and then, nothing ever develops for the person from there. So if they're truly interested, I think it's a great way to just have that contact, as you say.
Mm-hmm. What is the most challenging part of this particular soiree for you?
I would say the most challenging part is having people come through that are so on edge about what witchcraft is. It's almost as though they want to come through for a scandal, if that makes sense.
Oh,
they're interested, but they don't want to be interested, but they do. So it's a very weird thing to kind of suss out there. And also, like I say, just some very colorful characters upon occasion that come through and you're like, oh, okay, is that it? I'm glad you think that's what the craft is. At the end of the day, it hasn't been too difficult at all. I must say it's actually been a very lovely experience when we have had them.
That's very interesting. I think it's very important for people to get together, and this comes, I must say that the soiree is, first I heard of it was from Maxine, and it was in regards to what they were doing at the time. But you do have a soiree now. For instance, Maxine did one in London, and it was in a public place. And she, people were asking questions and things. So it took a little bit of a different shape, I think, the project. And now it's used by a lot of people. I think it's very interesting and very wonderful, way of contacting people and people contacting us. I think it's really good. Are you going to do one, Michael?
Funny you should ask. Yes. So I am planning one probably after spring. Yeah. But again, it is like, where do I get the word out? Just either on my website or beyond. And then, of course, where would I hold it? Probably in a public space, which is, safer. You have to meet people. And then even just to meet people in your local community who may never, as you said, ask for initiation. But there are lots of magic workers out there with interesting ideas.
And there will be a couple of people that will come always.
Yeah.
And you will have those, and then maybe you will have one at your home because you will now trust these people and you know them because you have done 5 or 6 or 7. Yeah. And then they eventually are the ones who are probably going to ask or with more interest because they're the regulars.
I actually wanted to speak about Alexandrian priests and priestesses that have to work solitary. So for instance, let's say I go over and get initiated, I bring the tradition back, and then I'm now working the magic, obviously, while waiting for a coven to come through. So I know something that's usually done is the invocation upon the altars and things like that for our respective deities, if we can put it that way without giving away too much. But, what other, I suppose, thoughts would you have on that? That solitary working that needs to be done for a short period of time, and also how it would affect polarity in the person themselves?
That's a great question because it happens, right? It happens when people leave one coven or they've moved and then they're in search of another. So how do you continue your practice? And I think upon initiation, at least speaking from my own personal experience, initiation changed my own personal practice outside of coven work. And I think the bottom line is that it's important to practice, right? And to continue to practice. And I think you can, in many ways, modify our practices and rituals to do it solitary. Is this the best way? No, because a witch really can't practice alone. In terms of polarity, you absolutely, I don't know, how much do I want to give away? It does. It absolutely affects polarity. And I think this is one of those reasons why it's so important to have men and women in your working coven. And you do feel very much that imbalance, and you do develop a really deep yearn for the other. And there are ways to fix that. I think that's all I'll say about that. But there are ways to rebalance. But I guess the bottom line is continue your work while you are in search of another coven, another home. What do you think, Kerrigan?
I think just because you are alone, you're not going to cease to be Alexandrian or cease to practice. Of course, the practice is very clear. It's between a priest and a priestess.
Absolutely.
However, because you are alone, your work will change as your practice will change as well. It doesn't mean that you have to modify per se the rites themselves. You can adapt them if you want to.
Better word. Yeah, adapt.
Yeah.
Better word.
So adapt to accommodate that particular practice. But, then again, I think that consciousness of practice, I think that's the best way to go about this. Consciousness of practice. If you are alone and you want to worship, you can absolutely cast a circle and do all of the things that you would do with some limitations. And the work is going to be different. Maybe it will be becoming a little bit more hermetic rather than sterilize the ritualistics. Maybe you are going to focus more on another part of the work. So it doesn't really, it's not going to be exactly the same. The impact that would have in polarity is very interesting because this takes us a little bit into this whole story about working with opposite polarity and working with same polarity. Goes into this whole thing because you're alone. And of course you are of a polarity, or you will emanate or vibrate in a specific polarity more than other. And of course that will have an impact because the work itself, the structure of the ritual is asking for balance. And of course it will get that balance out of the other polarity. And that's how it's designed. That's why we have all of these things designed ritualistically, designed like this, because it's all about balance, it's all about polarity, and it's all about creation. But sometimes people hold on to this idea, because I'm a solitary, I can't be an Alexander, or because I'm a solitary, I can't really do Alexandrian witchcraft, which is not true because, your basics are there. You are still doing the casting, you're still doing the techniques, you're still using. It's just intelligently really changing the nature of the work. The work might be a little bit more hermetic, it might become a little bit more centered in other aspects of and celebrating. I mean, I have my personal devotional work. So I think that it shifts, the work shifts. The same thing happens, for instance, when you have a coven that suddenly it loses all the priestesses and is all men, or a coven that loses all men and then it becomes a priestess only coven. And this is very interesting because people panic. They said, "Oh my God, what should I do? What should we do?" Because now it's like all men and all women, and it's not to panic. They're priestesses and they're priests. It's the work that has to shift into another type of work, which is, of course, a more emetic work that could be worked together in a group, but it's a different work. It's not really the same one. We're not going to adapt, okay, so it's all women. Now one of the women is going to become a man or a priest or representing a priest, or because we're not at war. This is not an emergency.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? So it's not really that. So, and of course, if it is not an emergency, then let's be intelligent and shift the work into another direction that could continue the progression of the spiritual progression. So we can evolve the same way. It's just that the work has taken another tone. I say to my students, you were expected to work this alone. There are certain things that we have to work alone to develop that thing or that particular piece. And there's natural work that comes up, but the work itself, it's parallel to another work, which is the work of the Coven, which is the work of the whole group, which is different. It's a different work.
It's very interesting to hear it from a different perspective as well, because as you know, the high priest of my coven had that sort of experience when he brought the tradition back and was working for a while before I joined the coven. And it's just very interesting hearing that, because it's obviously not something I've had to go through other than doing my own personal rituals, the devotional, the offerings, things like that. And I must say, it is extremely jarring the first time that you start doing your own personal workings outside of the coven when you're used to that coven setting. and that polarity and having all those things built and helped with. So it was just something that once I started working on my own a little bit as well, I had a lot more sympathy for the solitary practitioner, if that makes sense.
It's experienced in different ways, I think, because if you work alone, and of course you have to, if you don't have anyone else, it's quite difficult. And this is circumstantial, right? So if somebody comes from another country, they go there, they're initiated, and then they go back to their own country, and then of course, now they're alone. And this is always what I thought that it would be a good idea. It would be if more than one person would be initiated and they go back. Even if they are first degrees, they can still work together. And that's really good. It's a good thing to have another person. If you don't have anyone, the work is different. It's a different kind of work. And it was really kind of difficult to set up this work. So the circumstances of the situation just asked for it. And to begin to work solitary in a tradition that it's basically made for two, at least, it's quite difficult. And sometimes it has some repercussions in terms of polarity that it's kind of a little bit difficult to overcome. But it is possible. And we actually had the example, very good one actually, of that happening. And that's your high priest, I think. So it's really interesting because I want to have him here as well, so that we can talk about this a little bit more, because it's his experience. I can't tell you how happy we were when you turned up.
Probably about as happy as I was to be initiated.
Yes.
I also think too, I think the height of the pandemic made everyone solitary. Yes. For a while, right? And I think that also added in, to your point, Kerrigan, this sort of flexibility of, okay, what other kind of workings can we do even though we can't actually physically meet?
I don't know if you know this, but I worked with Gypsy Ravish for a long time, and we were in the pandemic, and she said, I have this thing that I want to do online. I want to bring people together. Would you help me? And I said, yes, but I have some conditions. The first condition is, if we're going to do this, it has to be very good, very well thought. And what we're giving them has to have a very good quality. And of course, it's going to be hermetic, because it's going to be inner workings of the individual that is totally isolated somewhere on Earth. And this has to have an impact on the individual development. So let's come up with something that could be, and of course, I don't know if our listeners, seekers listening to us, we do work a lot hermetics, and we work those inner workings very, very frequently. So I thought it was a good thing, because this was a public thing. This was not really just an Alexandria. This was a public thing. But I thought, if we can bring good quality hermetics so that the individual can work inner work, it would be fantastic, because then they would come out of it not just like a Zoom meeting, but it actually had an impact on the spiritual piece of each of the individual differently, right? Because every person is different, and the impact is different in each of the individuals in their own state of development. So I said to her, this is what I want to do. And she said, okay. So that's what we did. We did online Zoom thing for the Sabbath. And each Sabbath, I would have an inner working of hermetics for those who were listening to us.
Next one would actually be the same-sex initiation that you were discussing the last time around. And it was part of that polarity that I was discussing, because to have a bit of a personal experience with it, before I joined the craft, I was quite the tomboy, put it that way. And the profound effect that initiation had on me as a person, and kind of healing that balance in myself, I'm just very concerned as to why people would want to remove that dichotomy from the craft, without necessity, obviously, of all the priests left the coven, or I'm working solitary. But for the initiation, I'm just quite struggling to understand what would be the reason for that. And it's also just come down to something, and this is kind of the seed that I wanted to discuss bringing this up, along with the craft must change you, you must not change the craft, and those sorts of practices is, if somebody has been working the craft and they have come to the realizations, because let's face it, as much as we can go, I'm an Alexandrian, the practices that you do, the rituals that you run, the sabbats, the esbats, all of that is supposed to reveal deeper meanings to you. And if those meanings have been revealed, and if you've been working the craft, why would you want to change that and remove those meanings for new initiates?
We're going to talk a little bit more about this in another episode, because we are going to touch it again. I think you just focused on one thing that I think that we didn't actually talk about this, Michael, in the other one, which was, why would you deprive people of, or why would you just change for the sake of change, just because you say that it's evolving? But is it evolving in the right direction? That's my question. But anyway, so it really comes down to, there is a system that was put in place that it worked for, I don't know, maybe 40 years, right? I think it's just purely accommodation. I'm not sure if there is any sound occult reason for this. People would say, well, same-sex initiation works the same way, and it's exactly the same, and people have the same experiences, and people have the same, and it takes. There is this whole thing about taking, right? The initiation took. And it takes. Well, that's wonderful for those individuals, but our system is very clear, and it was clear since the beginning. And Maxine is very clear about this, and how Alex actually thought about it as well. He always said, and she said he worked with groups of only men, but he was conscious that this was not witchcraft. But there's other traditions that could accommodate that. And actually, the whole tradition was built up on that particular way. So why change something that it's so fundamental, which is the initiation?
I agree with both of you. And I don't understand why they are changing it. If I have to boil it down, I would say it's political, and it responds very much to the times in which we are living. So where we are advocates of inclusivity on every level, and I'm not saying that I'm not an advocate of inclusivity. I have to put in that caveat. It's also sort of guised with this idea that, well, we're more evolved in our understanding of polarity, in that the masculine and the feminine dwell within us, and our goal is for union, and we already have that union within. And I guess that, I don't know, I guess that would be their primary argument. And as for depriving an initiate of experiencing the other, because that's what I think is so important here, I think there are many, many people, and I could be wrong, I don't know this statistically, that like this idea in the sense of, sure, why does it matter if a woman initiates me? Why does it matter if it's another man that initiates me? Why does it matter if it's a non-binary individual who initiates me? And again, because they don't have that understanding of how polarity on this level works, and not an occult understanding either, like, as above, so below. We are reflecting something in the universe in terms of the system that we are working with, in terms of male and female. And I always bring up this point, is that there are hundreds of traditions that you can partake in that do not do cross-sex initiation. The Cabot tradition is one of those. Or if you want all same sex, there's those traditions as well. So I don't know if many people just want the moniker, the title of Alexandrian, but then change the practice to something that's almost unrecognizable. And for your point, Kerrigan, for what benefit? So what does it actually do? Magically, I haven't experienced, so I don't know. I guess I would have to be proven wrong in terms of how that actually works magically.
I think there is an attempt to sanitize everything, accommodate to the individual ego, not the magical ego. I'm talking about the mundane ego. And there is an attempt, to the point that it goes into extremes of our interpretation of divinity does not have to be gender associated. Therefore, let's take all of that out. Let's talk about the gods being just essences or forces. Let's not give them any kind of polarity associated with them, so that we don't. So we're going to call them something else. We're going to direct our energy and relate with them in this way of a non-defined, undescript, completely blend of definition, so that we can be, again, political. I think it's political, and I think that it's lack of understanding. And of course, there's this whole thing about, oh yes, but Kabbalah. So this is something that has been studied in length by all of the Kabbalists, and we're not Kabbalists, we're witches. But our consciousness of this is very specific. Alex brought that and Maxine to the craft as well. Why would you want to be an Alexandrian if you're not going to do what Alexandrians always did?
I think that hits the nail on the head for that point. If you want to take the tradition, strip it down, and redress it in another color, don't call it Alexandrian witchcraft and no one would have a problem.
Why is it so important to you to be called Alexandrian? That would be my question. Why would you want to be called Alexandrian if you really are not doing anything that resembles what was done and what is done by other groups? Because, when we talk about a tradition, we're talking about a group of people in many places, in different contexts, in different cultures, but they're all united by one practice and one belief. Independently of all of the works that each group does, they're having a common thing. That's why we all are called Alexandria. Not just because we can trace our lineage back to Alex and Maxine, but also because we have a practice that it's recognizable between all of us. When somebody practice is unrecognizable to the point of changing initiation rites and changing the way that we call the gods or the way that we address the gods, which are very specific for us. For me, it's why are you holding to Alexandrian if you're clearly not satisfied with what Alexandrian is?
And why would you give up that pool and reservoir of power? Like calling out the secret names of our gods. Why would you not want to tap into that? That's been done for 5 decades at this point by hundreds of Alexandrian covens meeting, many times per year, calling out those names.
Well, we wish them well.
We wish exactly. We wish them well. And it's true. And it again, like, this is for seekers. Like, these are questions that seekers need to ask.
One of the things that the other day I've heard something about traditional Gardnerians, because sometimes you have to come up with words to define yourself when somebody else is actually so down the road of nowhere that you have to identify yourself. You have to add a word to what you are so that you can be differentiated from those who are deep down in the road of nowhere. And you know what I mean? So, Gardnerians did this. A group of Gardnerians just came about and said, enough is enough. We're going to call ourselves traditional Gardnerians so that we can differentiate ourselves from inclusive Gardnerians. Yeah. This is what they call the other, inclusive Gardnerians. And one of the things that I thought that it was extraordinary, they said, and we're not sure if in the future inclusive Gardnerians are going to be recognized as true Gardnerians in the future. I thought it was very, but it's of course they're called fundamentalists and this and that. But you need to never Gardnerian was a word that was needed to be added to another word to define what they did. From the point of when people begin to strip down, include everything, changing things to the way they feel that it is convenient for them and that worked for them, to the point that it's unrecognizable for the rest of the group, because there's another group, right, of people that are still doing, what they're supposed to do. We need a word, and they need the word, and they come up with traditional guardians, and they call the other ones inclusive guardians. There is a need, if you are going to separate yourself so much, and you're holding to the title of, or the name, you're holding to the name, but you're changing so much. The other group, which is the others, that not you, the others, they have to come to the conclusion that they had to add a word to distinguish themselves from you, because we're no longer all Alexandrians, because what you do is a different thing.
Yeah.
So I have to say, I'm not like, do you remember, Michael, the pagan thing that we said, if you're pagan, well, sometimes I'm pagan, sometimes I'm not, depending on the occasion, you know what I mean? Yeah. And the name is important.
It is important. I think this is so much of this is political, because we're living in a time of where language is being commandeered. So therefore, words are no longer defined as they've been traditionally defined for hundreds of years. And with this, and then this is all under the claim of coven autonomy as well. So in the sense of, I'll do inside of my coven whatever I want to do, and you can't tell me otherwise. Which is all well and good. However, you need to be honest about what you're doing to those who are seeking to become initiate.
I couldn't imagine how horrible it must be. You've received your 3rd degree in Gardnerian or Alexandrian. You've moved. You're joining another coven, or you've been invited to participate. You walk in and you go, "What is this?
Yeah, unrecognizable.
I've never seen this before in my life." And then all those experiences that you had, and I'm not saying that you wouldn't have still had valid experiences if you were true in your devotion, but to be able to sit there and go, is my 3rd degree even worth anything? I have to relearn all of this. And I mean, we're all practicing witches. We should all be willing to learn all the time. We're not, retired witches. We're practicing witches, no matter what degree you have under your belt. But just, I think it must be a fundamental shock to your system that you've devoted so much time, so much effort, all these things, to just find out that somebody's taken what you thought was the craft and butchered it.
Yeah.
Into something unrecognizable by you and everybody else. I mean, that happened. That actually happened many times to many people that I know. And what do? They submit themselves to the wonderful thing, which is, I don't know, I have been trained in a different thing. Let me just retrain.
Yeah.
Or let me just receive and ask for training, or ask for further training. This is what happened. And we're talking about years of people being in something and then coming out of that, and then realizing that this has nothing to do with what was really originally, or that what people do. The reason autonomy is great, because you can decide what to do in your own group, and it's wonderful. It's great. But that cannot be an excuse for you to just detach yourself to the point that we can't really recognize what you do, because we're all part of a big group. Alexandrian, it's just not a suggestion. It's a tradition.
I completely agree with that statement.
In terms of, to your point about imagine going to, another circle, and another Alexandrian circle, and not recognizing what you see. And just from speaking from personal experience, going into another Alexandrian circle, be like, oh, this is very different, ritualistically. But not even that. I think what's telling is power. Going into another circle, and there's power there, and there's power being raised. And then you're like, oh no, this is not happening in where I just came from, which also then leads into this whole idea of training. And that's the difference between good training and bad training. There are people get F's as grades and people get A's as grades. There are differences. And I would say that's the difference is the generating of the magic of the power.
Let's just say that not all of the teachers are good.
No.
And not all of the students are good.
Nope.
So sometimes you can have a wonderful, and not all 3rd degrees should teach. because they're not good teachers.
Not good teachers.
And of course, let's recognize this. Some people do have this vocation for teaching, and they're extremely good teachers. I mean, rare, absolutely. There's like a couple of them, they're absolutely fantastic. And then there's all of the rest.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, in all of the rest, there's the bad ones that have no, I mean, you're talking about bad training. What about none at all?
I know.
That's even worse. Because I have no patience for this. Oh, no, not today. I'm going to cancel. No. And then, of course, this goes on and on and on. When you enter this other group, which is a very disciplined group, a group that it's good at what they do, they're focused, they do the inner work, there is a consciousness in this group that it's incredible. They do deliver the technique. It's there. They have been doing this and training this for years. There is a difference.
Absolutely.
This shows. It shows. You can feel it in your bones. You can feel it everywhere. And then, of course, why discard these things that were so generously shared with us and passed down to us to just, we have to evolve into this, goodness knows what, and then come up with, why reinventing the wheel? It's a system. It's an esoteric and occult system. You don't reinvent occult systems other than, enhancing them. If you're not enhancing them, what are you doing?
And I think this comes to another point that I just wanted to bring up, since it's in the same sort of vein. Ideas of what can and can't be changed in the craft. And I think we touched a little bit on that with the solitary, that if you're working on your own, things are changed out of necessity. Mm-hmm. And that's just a word that I kind of wants to hammer home there. Necessity. Mm-hmm. Not I feel like it or I don't want to. It's a necessary change. Like, let's say you have 2 Coven members. You can't run a rite with having somebody stand and officiate something, if that makes sense. You have to actively participate. Right. But you are not changing the rite itself. You're just changing the parts that need to be played. Somebody would be made to learn their lines off by heart instead of standing with the book if their hands need to be busy. Mm-hmm. And just something that I wanted to bring up as well for the change in the Southern Hemisphere versus the Northern Hemisphere, with the swapping of the Sabbath dates. If you wanted to be terribly persnickety with it, you could say, well, that's changing the craft. Yeah. But again, it's out of necessity. We can't be celebrating winter solstice in the middle of summer. That would make no sense.
We have to be very intelligent in the way that we practice the craft. And the challenging thing about this is a sense of purpose. You have to have a sense of purpose in everything that you do in the craft, including your choices on how you go about your own practice. And we need to be conscious about not only ourselves, conscious of self, but you also need to be conscious of the world around you and your environment. And maybe nature. Nature is very important for you to listen to what nature is saying to you. And of course, in the South Hemisphere, it's completely different and opposite of what we do, and there's some countries, let's just say, that it's almost imperceptible because they're such in a liminal space between the equators that there's no real evident differences. In terms of, that's clearly winter. You know what I mean? You can't be doing lamas. I wouldn't say that is a change. I would say that you're still doing the Sabbaths. You're still doing them in the place, in nature, where they are manifesting in your own land. I would say you're adapting it to a different land, which is not really changing. It's just putting them in the right place as it feels the emanation of nature on that particular vibration on that particular land. And you're not changing the Sabbath. It was just you're celebrating it in a place where it makes more sense for your land. And of course, we have to listen to the land. We have to listen to what nature has to say about this, because we are actually doing things according to the cycles of nature and of creation. So we're respecting that. Basically, I would say that it's an adaptation and kind of putting things in places that they should be rather than imitating. And we should be intelligent. We shouldn't imitate just for imitation. You know that that thing about, you shouldn't copy the Book of Shadows. We have more than one Book of Shadows. This is going to be very shocking to people. But we do have, and we have a Coven book, and that Coven book shouldn't be copied in its entirety. The reason why, it's because you need to do your own work if you're going to found a new Coven. So you don't want to imitate exactly what your previous Coven was doing, or just reproduce it, just because you need to develop your own work. And this comes in because of that that thing that we said, Coven autonomy. What is the work that we are developing in Covens? This is the innovation of the work of a Coven is not changing what is already established. It's actually developing other things that could enhance that.
I definitely agree with it. It's the addition rather than the subtraction of things, or the snipping of things that are not understood. Building up your own Coven book, your own practices, rituals that work for you, rituals that don't, even spells that work for you, spells that don't, a specific way to call upon whatever we are working with in our circle, or something that we work with often, would be different to when you move off and use your own circle. Again, that's not changing the actual book. And I think that's more where this comes in, is that people are taking the actual book and just going, nah, I don't like this. Oh, this rule, what does it mean in today's life? Just cut it out, move it away. We don't like it. We'll do our own thing.
I totally agree. I think when you're developing, you're still in the same stream of the tradition, and there's nuances that your rituals will take on. But I agree totally, in no way are you going through the Book of Shadows and just, clipping, I don't like this, I don't like that. Discard our core practices.
And this has to work, right? If you're not going to navigate in the same stream and you're going to go into high C just because you think that it's better than, you're going to be lost. Eventually you will, get caught in the storm.
Exactly. You are going to be lost in high C. But a lot of people, well, I don't know if a lot of people, but some say that, well, this is what Alex was. Alex was a rebel. Alex went and did change the tradition. And by nature, as Alexandrians, this is what we're supposed to do. But Alex was an incredibly knowledgeable occultist. Like, when he was making changes, he knew what he was doing in making certain changes. And I'm not sure everyone is as equipped as Alexanders when they're making their changes, probably out of discomfort.
When people give the excuse that Alex did it, Alex was a rebel, he changed the Gardnerian tradition, and therefore we can change it as well. They're comparing themselves with Alex.
Yeah.
Which for me, it's quite unbelievable. The other piece is he changed consciously. He knew what he was changing, and he had a purpose. Him and Maxine, they have both a purpose. They had a purpose on the changes that they did and why they did them. And it's interesting to actually see today that the people that are actually taking these things out, they are taking it out, even the things that he changed. And they're just taking this rebel kind of thing about Alex. Yes, he was a rebel, and we all know that he was, and Maxine as well. They were both rebels, but they were rebels with a cause and rebels with very, very fine-tuned to what they wanted to do, and they stick to it. One of the things that I actually talked about with Maxine was, if there is a couple of things in our main book that they're clearly Gardnerian things, and of course, we came from Gardnerian, but they are clearly Gardnerian. And one of the questions that I asked her, why didn't Alex took them out of the book? Why are they there? Why, if they're not even, we don't even do that because we're Alexandrian, we don't really do that. And she said, I asked the same question to Alex. And he said to me, the book was given to me like this. I will respect the book.
Yeah.
Like he was given to me. I might not do those things. I might not take, but I'm not going to take them out.
Yeah.
I'm not going to take them out and erase them from the book and pass the book incomplete. So there is a respect that Alex had towards the people that gave him the book and passing the book. And this is really something that I think that it's lacking. It's an uttermost disrespect based on we're rebel like Alex was. So I think that the rebel kind of label comes up again and again and again as an excuse for whatever we want to do, we'll do, with no consequence or with no thinking. I mean, I'm sure they think, but, you know, I'm not sure if the thinking is thorough.
The other point that I just wanted to go on to was to talk a little bit about the when people are initiated and they don't take responsibility for themselves in terms of letting the initiators know that they've had trauma, they've had all of these sorts of things happen to them, and what we actually need to ask. And, you know, before we accept them for the sort of read this, do that, and definitely before the initiation. And I mean, sure, we ask a whole bunch of things. You know, do you have the time? Are you stable? Do you have work? Do you have your own transport? And it really sounds, I think, quite bizarre to people outside of the craft that those are the questions that are asked of them when they seek initiation. But it's to safeguard everybody involved, obviously, because we don't expect seekers to know all the ins and outs. However, it also comes down to there are things that people that are taking on the responsibility of requesting initiation need to take responsibility for. And I mean, that's one of the reasons that we say, you know, when you request your initiation, you need to specifically say, I am requesting initiation. It's about that will. And, you know, there's certain things that people should kind of have the thinking of disclosing. So, for instance, you know, drug abuse, alcoholism, if there's been any trauma in the past. And if they've read craft books, again, like What Witches Do or Firechild, I'm very confused as to how they wouldn't know that there would be triggers in the initiation rite. I mean, it's quite clearly laid out there.
It is. And you know, we talked about this, Michael, the other day because of that incident that person had, that she was abused by her father at some point in her life when she was a little girl or whatever it was. And somehow the initiation triggered that experience again. This is the thing. I mentioned this before. We find ourselves now asking questions to people that nobody thought about asking before because this is our experience. There's a whole lot of consciousness now onto trauma and previous trauma, alcoholism, etc. I totally agree with you. It's there. If we read books on the craft, wine is mentioned many times. Mm-hmm. I would think, okay, so hey, I've heard that there's wine. I'm an alcoholic. Is that a problem if I don't drink wine? That would be something that I would ask.
And I mean, obviously they've read it, because one of the questions that always get hammered on from people, and like I do understand, it was also one of my biggest worries before I was initiated, was like, that was silly. I was worrying about that, was the Skyclad. So obviously they've read the stuff. If they're coming up with, but I see that rituals are done Skyclad, and, you know, do we have to? That's definitely something that they bring up. So why not the rest?
We're living in, and again, this is, as you said, right, Kerrigan, like these are questions that are being asked that we would not have asked, you know, probably in the 1980s or the 1970s, because we're living in an age of consent, where there are some hairstylists who will ask you first before cutting your hair, may I touch you? And I would love to see a hairstylist cut your hair without touching you. We're based on this, like, no one enter my space without my permission. And you bring up Veiled Priestess. You bring up a really good point. How much do you disclose without then compromising the oaths that you have taken to someone who has not been initiated? And I absolutely agree with you. If you are reading all of these witchcraft books on British traditional Wicca, you should know what some of these initiate rites look like. And I'm not saying that they're accurate, but you should know what some of these initiates look like. And you should be sort of, okay, I guess I could go through that, or I guess I could go through that, or guess how I could go through, that. But witchcraft is uncomfortable. I think it's uncomfortable for the most, level-headed, stable person that enters the craft, that you will be put into an uncomfortable space.
I ask questions like, do you have any health issues that could prevent you to drink wine, dance vigorously, and going up and down on your knees?
I ask, what is your threshold for pain? Or is it a 0?
Do you bleed a lot?
Exactly.
But yes, so I do ask these questions. And then, of course, I ask them, do you have any psychological issues that you had in the past or still having?
Are they being managed? Are you in control of?
Are you being medicated?
Yeah. No, managed.
Yeah, no, but it's true. It is true. All of this that we ask is to protect the person.
Absolutely.
Because we're already in. Mm-hmm. We're already practicing. This is to protect the person. If the person says to me, I can't drink wine because I'm an alcoholic, I can't even see it because I will have a relapse, I will say, I'm sorry, we can't really take you.
Yeah.
Because there will be wine. Yeah. And, taking that wine away because one person cannot drink it or see it is depriving all of the other initiates of the experience of the mystery of the wine. Yeah. And it putting that person at risk of relapsing. So I rather say, I'm sorry, I don't think this is for you. This coven might not be for you. Because, then we begin to accommodate. I have issues with my body. Everybody has issues.
Everybody has issues.
Right? Just, I have a toe that it's like crooked or whatever. Exactly. I mean, everybody has the thing. So, and of course, Skyclad is really not being naked. It's more than that. So of course, people sometimes don't understand this. One of the very good thing, and I was criticized by actually a priestess that I initiated about this. Don't talk about Skyclad because people will be very, we shouldn't be talking about Skyclad. I think we should, because this is one of the hangups that people have, that it's, they have no idea about why we do it. So we might as well say why we do it, and people will be informed. If it's not for them, it's not for them. That's great. So you might want to go away and resolve your nudity issues. But if you have a challenge and you see that it's part of this, then wonderful, because, it is up to you to go through it and see if you can actually survive the experience. It's just this is what initiations are.
Yeah.
These are things that you have to work in yourself and you have to go.
I must say, it was a very big worry for me to start off with. Before I was initiated, I was one of those people that would get changed in a gym with my towel on me. But once initiated and within the circle, that worry falls away completely. And I think it's a very big difference to kind of quote between the sacred and the profane. The sacredness of the circle kind of strips you of that. And it's not a problem I've had since joining the craft. In circle, I obviously would still give a funny look at people if they said to me, go to a nude beach. But within the sanctity of the circle and within the practices that we do, Skyclad was no longer an issue. And it hasn't been since that day.
The experience of Skyclad, we're not, and when you talk about Skyclad and people ask you, well, what is that? And then you say, oh, it's ritual nudity. The moment that nudity comes up, they will put this word and the meaning of the word into a context of course, has to be, of mundane. Mm-hmm. It's not inside of the circle. It's not, because they don't have that experience yet. So they won't have that piece. So what they understand about this is nudity outside of the circle. And that's their experience, either in the shower, in bed, whatever it is, that's their significant, of the word. So the meaning that it takes. It's totally incomplete. And it doesn't matter how much you explain to them. Well, it's in a sacred circle. It's different. We feel different. It's just the experience will give you that particular change. You won't know until you just experience it in that particular environment. So when people ask us this, and we explain to them, it's kind of difficult to convey because it is an experiential thing. You have to be experiencing this inside of a circle to understand that it's actually not what they feel that it is outside.
And unfortunately with the craft, because there are so many things that need to be experienced, not stated, I think it's difficult to convey to people the meaning behind what we do. But that is all that part of, you need to have trust. And without trust and that want to be able to change and challenge yourself, what are you doing asking for initiation?
That's right. And this is why we like to have a priestess.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It's contemporary issues of the body, which didn't necessarily exist, historically and in all cultures, where it's the ultimate vulnerability mixed with this sort of hypersexualization of the nude body. So people come into it with these kinds of terrible preoccupations. But I totally agree with the Veiled Priestess that just goes, it really does. It goes all away in the context of sacred space. And there's a whole tradition in Renaissance art that shows this. The mundane is clothed and the sacred is nude. It is really tapping into something cosmic, right? It's tapping into something universal.
Maybe when we talk about Skyclad in another episode, when we talk about the basics, it's to search for meanings in all of these things, in art and in other places. Nudity in the 70s was not really the same as now.
Different.
So because we evolved in this notion of nudity that they had no problem whatsoever at that time, probably in some cultures they would, but generally speaking at the time, all of those movements, freedom was the word. And of course, freedom of everything, including clothes, which I'm remembering Woodstock. And of course, but the fact that the society parallel to this, society has evolved in a different way in terms of giving a significance for this particular word. But the craft has maintained this particular thing because it's not mundane, it's actually occult waste. So of course we maintain it because it's part of what we do and how we do it and why we know it. It's parallel. So the one evolves into this thing and then one maintains the same because it's, of course, works. It works. We're not changing it. It works. I would like to ask you both a question. What about initiations without being Skyclad? Would you accommodate that? What would be the reason for you to present and say, actually, we can't really do that? Not just because it's done, but what would be the reason why you would think that it would be necessary to be Skyclad?
Without trying to give too much away, it is to do with rebirth. It is that death and resurrection of self in a new life in a new way. Are you born clothed, or are we taking it back to that innocence that is really, in my experience, the root of the craft? That innocence, that joy, that revelry. And again, I think changing the initiation rites is changing the person being initiated's experience. And it's so difficult to say any of this without giving anything away. But just the beauty of my own initiation would have been dulled. That shock when you open your eyes and you're a witch would have been dulled if not all of that mundane had been stripped, if not those trials had been gone through. And I mean, the Skyclad's not the only trial. There's the challenge. There's so many things. There's the waiting blindfolded before you even do anything, before anybody even comes to get you. The calling of the names and things like that while you're walking. And all of these things built up the experience to such a life-changing and profound moment that I think subtracting anything from that without damn good reason would really just be cheating the person being initiated.
I totally agree. And how can I get around this? It is part of the mystery. There is a mystery there. And I would also argue that the opposite sex initiation, there is a mystery there. And to take those away, you have lost that mystery, which has to be experienced. And that is why, no, I would not initiate robed. And I can't think of an accommodation that would call for that. Otherwise, I'm so sorry, not my coven. So, but there are other paths, or maybe other covens that can accommodate you.
Again, if there is a medical reason or something like that, but it's passing, then just move up the initiation date.
I once refused to be part of an initiation because the high priest of that coven agreed to initiate somebody with the robe. I said, I'm not doing it, not participating in it. I'm not doing it. Eventually, the person then agreed to be Skyclad.
Well, there you go.
There it is.
Yeah, but I still didn't go. And the reason why I didn't go, it's not because, I'm just like, I don't go, I'm not going. It's just, it was such a drained thing to try to explain to this high priest why would it be, that person was not properly prepared in that way, So I think you shouldn't be doing this, right? They should know already that there is a mystery, like you say, Michael. There is a mystery. There is an experience, like you said. And, if it isn't, but fortunately, other than initiations, we do have the choice. But, initiations are to be done Skyclad. And some people have difficulties with that. Then they should just resolve their difficulties before they come to the threshold of the temple.
And again, I think this all comes back to the idea of accommodation. And to be completely frank, I think accommodation can only be brought in once a person has been initiated and has worked the craft. So, for instance, let's say somebody's worked the craft for 40 years, they can no longer kneel. They are now a 70, 80-year-old person. If they choose to sit in a chair or a throne, for instance, surely that kind of an accommodation would be made. Or like, let's say somebody that has become pregnant, obviously they won't be expected to drain a chalice full of wine. But that accommodation is for witches that are working. You can't come in and expect the craft to change for you. Allowances can be made in certain aspects, but also things that are passing or things that are unavoidable.